Hi everyone, my name is James Orme, editor of Techerati.com, and today I'm joined by Joe Baguley, Vice President and CTO EMEA at VMware. How are you getting on, Joe?
Hi, James. Doing fine. You know, another day, another Zoom call.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, we're going to talk about your upcoming appearance at Cloud Expo Europe's Virtual Infrastructure Summit in a couple of weeks. But before we get stuck into all things cloud freedom and agility, can you just explain a little bit more about your background and how long you've been at VMware?
So yeah, I've been at VMware for 10 years. Well, nearly it'll be 10 years in June next year, so 9.5 years. I've been doing Cloud Expo Europe since it started as well. I'm quite sad I'm not actually going to go to be there in person this year. It's usually a good chance to catch up with some friends in the industry and see what's going on and have a gossip. Usually is where these things happen. Yeah, so I've been here for 9.5 years. Prior to that, I was at a company called Quest Software for 10 years, which we took from being quite small to being sold by, being acquired by Dell, should I say. And then moved on to VMware. And when I joined VMware, we were sort of about 6,000 strong. And now we're about 35,000 strong, so that's quite a big step up. And it's been quite a dramatic growth over the last 10 years from, you know, what people thought was the company that just does virtualization to now the company that essentially provides the cloud that goes everywhere, I suppose is a good way to put it.
Are you going to do anything to celebrate your 10-year anniversary?
We celebrate binary anniversaries at VMware. So we celebrate. I got. You get something for your 4th. You get something for your 8th, 12th, 16th, etc. So 10th. I think I'll get a note from LinkedIn saying well done on your 10th, but that'll probably be about it.
Yes, the excellent LinkedIn notification. Fantastic. So I was going to dive into a bit about VMware's evolution first, actually, because obviously, as you say, they're sort of more historically well known as the conqueror of virtualization. But would it be fair to say that your strategy has shifted somewhat in recent years? Can you share a little bit more about VMware's new focus and a strategy going into the future?
Yeah, so the first 10 years, of this century, actually, and we're just over 21 years old now. So the first 10 years really was, becoming, as you say, the leaders in virtualization, x86, without a doubt, market leaders, over 80% market share, all that kind of stuff. And then the last 10 years, I actually did a retrospective. We have a thing called the VMware User Group, and they happen globally. But it was my 10th keynote at that this year, actually this week. And I went back and looked at my presentations from the last 10 years because I keep them. It's quite interesting to look at what I was saying 10 years ago. And really, we've been over the last 10 years assembling and building what we called the software-defined data center, which the industry then took that term and took it on as their own. But it was that fundamental piece of taking the virtualization we've done for compute, adding to that virtualized networking, adding to that virtualized storage, creating a marketplace around hyperconverged infrastructure at the same time, which has now become a rather large market, and really defining sort of the operating system for data centers, around the world as we go forward with what we now call VMware Cloud Foundation. But we shouldn't overlook a couple of things in there, which is, probably, what's coming up big at the moment. So the one thing that's always sat next to it, that has always been overlooked by most people, is our end user computing solutions, what's now called Workspace ONE, which is essentially around delivering apps and data securely to anyone, anywhere. And that's grown dramatically from sort of 10 years ago, VDI with some Windows XP machines, to, full management of pretty much any device type you like. I mean, we're managing Coke machines, we're managing handheld devices in soldiers' hands, and all manner of wonderful things, and managing the secure delivery apps to that. So there's a big sort of stream that runs alongside in Workspace ONE, a lot of people overlook. And then around that, you've got security. And obviously the headline news this year was the acquisition of Carbon Black earlier this year, but that builds on a legacy of security that we've had for a long, long time around, from the very start of what we did with our hypervisor through what we're doing with role-based access control and endpoint security and everything else we've done alongside. But we're a company that did security, but weren't known for security software, I think is a good way to put it. So now expect to see us known a bit more for security software, as well as just providing security to our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fair to say VMware's fingerprint is just about everywhere when it comes to IT infrastructure, and everyone appreciates the huge impact and the role you play across enterprise IT. But it's interesting you mentioned that there's even more things that you guys get up to that are often overlooked on top of that.
So I mean, there's one thing to add, actually, which is probably the big piece, on top of that infrastructure piece, which is the what we now call Tanzu, which is the modern application suite. And I think that's worth having a little conversation about, well, just me telling you a little bit of history on. So if you rewind to 10 years ago, when I joined, I was working on a project in the office of the CTO called Cloud Foundry, which ultimately got spun out with some other assets and parts of stuff from EMC into Pivotal. Yep. And we reacquired Pivotal at VMware at the beginning of this year, brought it back in. Previously, the year before in 2018, at the end of 2018, we'd acquired Heptio, which gave us, the founders of Kubernetes in Craig and Joe, and sort of we've built Kubernetes into our platform. We've brought Cloud Foundry back in. That's now plugging back on top. So, when you want to talk about the stack, we've gone through IaaS and containers as a service, combined those into one in Cloud Foundation, because we now support containers and VMs side by side with Kubernetes built in. And then on top of that, platform as a service, and really going through an app modernization journey with our customers. So yeah, rewind 10 years. I'm into talking to people about what can you virtualize, what can't you virtualize. 10 years forwards, my conversation with CIOs and CXOs is much more around what's your app portfolio and what's your plans for that app portfolio in the next 5 years? What are you going to rehost? What are you going to refactor? What are you going to retire? Where's it going to end up? What's your multi-cloud vision? So it's people say 10 years at the same company, isn't it boring? No, it's completely different. It's like so different to what I was doing when I first joined. Yeah, no,
it's a great oversight. In many ways, it's sort of the history or the evolution of the past 10 years in the technology sector. Your VMware's own story sort of aligns with the evolution itself, right? So moving on to your panel that you're taking part in on the 9th at Cloud Expo Europe's virtual infrastructure summit. It's exploring cloud freedom and agility, and it's called Building Freedom in the Cloud. Now, when we talk about freedom in the cloud, what do we mean?
Well, I think a lot of people seem to, if we wind back to the early days of cloud, everyone saw it as this sort of fungible commodity, right? There were the grand visions of, I'll have full of the sun applications, I'll be able to move my stuff to running where it's cheapest at any one time, and all these other wonderful things that people thought the cloud was just going to be this place you could freely spin stuff up. We talked about cloud bursting, all these other wonderful things. The reality isn't and hasn't been that. And a lot of us back then, the cloud campers especially, sort of said that back then too. I think the reality you're now in is people are landing somewhere and staying there, whichever it's public cloud or whichever the hyperscalers they go to, or any of the providers, people like OVH and UK Cloud and so on. But what they're doing is they're going to individual clouds for individual features, functions, components, differentiators. So, that fungibility, that ability to swap and change isn't really happening. But when you talk about freedom, there's two things. There's the freedom that cloud gives you, in that the immense amount of choice and freedom of components and ways of building new and exciting applications. But then we also have to think about the freedom of, what if I want to back out of one of those? You look at some of the European banking regulations are about, if you're going into a public cloud, you have to show that it's reversible. They're surprisingly lacking in any kind of definition of time or function of how you do that, but at least they say it has to be reversible. So, the industry is littered with people who've been burnt by being locked in or built silos of operations or whatever. So I think really from our perspective, people are looking to say, okay, well, I love the freedom cloud gives me. I love the choice I've now got of building any app type anywhere. But I want to make sure that when I make a decision, I'm not making a decision I'm going to regret in 12 months, 18 months, whatever, when I want to swap that component for something else or back out or change clouds or whatever that is. So, freedom, I suppose it has to be looked on in both those aspects.
And zeroing in on the second aspect, I suppose that brings to the discussion multi-cloud. So obviously, and a lot of hype and a lot of excitement around multi-cloud, and it's fair to say there's a lot of substance behind it as well. I mean, adoption is rising year on year. I read somewhere that there's 7% growth year on year, possibly due to coronavirus. I can't remember the report. Now, what are some of the returns that the clients and the enterprises that you work with, what kind of returns are they seeing with multi-cloud strategy, and how are you enabling them getting the most from their multi-cloud goals?
So I'm proud of the fact that I've got a slide with multi-cloud and hybrid cloud written on it that's 10 years old. That's been going on a long time. And I think if you wind back time, people were sort of saying, oh, of course you're saying hybrid cloud, multi-cloud VMware because you're vested on premises, of course. And it's like, no, we're sort of different vision. And now I'm quite glad that everyone's talking about it and realize that it's done. The returns, I think, come, build upon those freedoms that I talked about. if you think previously when I was building on-premises applications, I was limited in my choice of the components I could use to build those applications based on what software vendors I could get. And, we had these famous best of breed stories, or do I go and buy full stack from a particular vendor like Oracle, IBM, SAP, or whatever to solve my problem? I think, what are the returns? Well, in a multi-cloud world, you can now pick and choose the best of multiple clouds. So if you want to go and use a bit of AI from one cloud and a bit of, image recognition from another cloud, there's something else that's really good at mass ingestion of data from IoT nodes, and then you've got something so on and so on and so forth. Someone else is really good at huge distributed databases and all these different bits and pieces. You've got a far, far greater choice than ever before. I think that's the return that people are getting is that choice of being able to freely compete and everyone has access to the same set of resources, I suppose. Then the flip side of that, as I always said, and what we're trying to do is unlock as much of that as possible for people while still maintaining some commonality or some level of operations and security and all the other bits and pieces you expect, the boring stuff that you have to do afterwards. Because people talk about day 0, day 1, and day 2. So day 0 is get some stuff and play with it in a lab. Everyone can do that, right? Day 1 is implement it in production. Bit trickier, but you can pay production, pay consultants, experienced people can come in and do that. Day 2 is where the rubber hits the road, right? That's where you've got to actually operate the thing. That's where you've got to go and prove compliance to various different bits and pieces on a regular basis. That's where you've got to do DR testing. That's where you've got to prove the backups work. That's where you've got to prove security and risk analysis and so on and so on and so on and so on and so forth. That's where we're focused. We're focused not in just enabling people to do the sexy things, but also the operations models around that. And we've always been that way. If you think back, there's always been other hypervisors, but the reason people wanted to come to VMware over time was the operational tool set we put on top of that made that hypervisor come alive, I suppose, really, and actually work. So our focus has been on data operations. And when it comes to public cloud, it's the same. How do we make it as easy as possible for people to move their workloads or adopt and create new workloads in the public cloud, whilst maintaining existing security models, existing operational models, enhancing those, of course. I'm not saying take your old boring stuff and try and extend it. There's new features and functions and bringing some of that back on premises as well. So it's kind of best of both worlds, if you want to look at it that way.
No, excellent. And we're talking about day 3. When we think about multi-cloud, what are some of the particular difficulties it comes to distributing your cloud estate when we're talking about the day 3 stage?
Well, I think that once you get past that, I think people start to realize that there's costs involved that they didn't quite realize before or didn't model properly. And in fact, we made an acquisition a few years ago, Cloud Health, which is now a core part of our multi-cloud management proposition in vRealize. And that really is about looking at application constructs and going, we could run this cheaper over there. We could move that component there and so on and so forth. I think when people start to get into a multi-cloud world, they don't realize what you pay for in some of these clouds. Suddenly you go and put an application out there and you realize it's a really chatty application. And oddly, you're billed on network, and when it was on premises, you didn't care about network costs because they were kind of hidden, right? Now you're being paid ingress egress fees or whatever it is, particular cloud, it suddenly gets expensive. And so, I was reminded the other day of the famous saying, there was a post from some Sun guys a few years ago in the 90s about the fallacies of distributed computing, and they still stand true today around, networks are not free, availability is not ubiquitous. And I think the availability piece, there's outages to public clouds all the time. I don't want to bash any particular cloud for having an outage at any one time, because that people miss the point that also when you go into the cloud, you have to do things differently. You have to think about designing for failure. You have to think about split availability. You have to think about where you're spreading and putting stuff. There's huge benefits can come from that, but you have to understand the risks. So it's changing that mindset as well is a key challenge when people start to adopt multi-cloud. And the problem is most people end up on multi-cloud by stealth. They don't end up there by strategy. So they'll find one department's done something with AWS and someone else has done something with Azure, and then some people over here doing some stuff with Google, and these people have done some stuff with another cloud, and so on and so on and so forth. And the CIO gets to sit there and go, yeah, we're multi-cloud. It's like, yeah, by accident. You didn't actually, how those, if someone came in and wanted to do an audit of where all your customer data is and how it's securely managed, could you answer that right now? Those are the kind of things we're talking about.
Okay, so would you say then the next evolution of multi-cloud is doing it in a much more deliberate and orchestrated fashion?
Totally. We talk about these sort of 5 R's of application portfolio planning, whether you're going to literally just leave it as it is, should I say? Not bother touching it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the first one. The second one is migrate, rehost it. Literally move it somewhere else. The third one is to actually rehost it in terms of replatforming, i.e. put it into containers and run it in a different way in microservices. Another one is to refactor it, which is rewrite the application. And the third one is to retire. First one's retain, leave it as it is. The last one's retire, which is just kill it off and go and use a SaaS option. People do that with their HR systems all the time, for example, swap it for Workday. So it's much more a case of, let's not look at this as a cloud thing. Let's not set my objective as being, I want to be multi-cloud. That's not what anyone's objective should be. What anyone's objective should be is, I want to look at how my applications are, what applications matter to my business, and what the plan is for those going forwards. What multi-cloud gives you is more options on those, right? You get more options on how to replatform, how to refactor, on how to rehost, and all those different things. That's what you should be focusing on. So it's almost like you end up as multi-cloud as a byproduct of doing a higher order activity around your application planning.
Excellent. Sorry, you might just have noticed that my amazing Bluetooth headphones just ran out of battery then, so I've had to switch to my internal microphone. Focusing on the UK market more generally, how would you describe the current state of multi-cloud adoption in the UK?
I think it's huge and vibrant. I think people focus a lot on the hyperscalers. And what they miss is there's a whole load more public clouds out there. So you've got the traditional hyperscalers that have been here for a while, the AWS's, Google's, the Microsoft's, et cetera, et cetera. But there's another whole load that I'm not even going to say are a tier below. They're alongside them doing different things. People like the UK clouds and Vodafone and many, many, many more that we've got that provide public clouds. We've got 4,500 worldwide public cloud providers that use VMware to run their public cloud. So don't think that the only choice you've got around using the public cloud is the headlines, is the big three, big four, or whatever you want to look at it, right? That there's a load more besides that gives you so much choice and options. And so, yeah, if you're based in the UK and you need a UK only data center that's run by UK people under UK law and blah, 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 then we can do that for you. If you want one that's part of a worldwide web of, POPs that go around the world, you can do that too. I think in the UK, we have more options than I think people realize. And I'm often asked as, the EMEA CTO for Europe, Middle East and Africa, why is EMEA different to America? Or why is it? It's not really. We tend to be very, in terms of what technologies we're using and when and how we're adopting them, pretty much the same. And the UK is not much different to anywhere else, but there's more choice than you think there is. And a really good example of that is, a few years ago, I was in South Africa, and the journalist, she sat there opposite me and sort of said, "Oh, aren't you excited about the cloud coming to South Africa?" And I looked at her quizzically and went, "What do you mean?" She went, "Well, Microsoft are going to launch Azure." I said, "I've got 49 cloud providers in South Africa already. What that's one more. It's not." So I think it's about the choice. It's about the openness, and I think people shouldn't ignore that.
Excellent. VMware has released recently a whole new suite of tools to sort of enable this multi-cloud evolution. Out of all of the ones that have sort of been released, which one are you particularly most excited about?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, we have a lot of products. I think generally the advances we've made in the vRealize suite that I talked about at the top, which includes those things such as the cloud health for the costing, etc. But we've also got some new AI and sort of machine learning tools in there that enable people to manage things at immense scale. We're also moving it so that a lot more of those products can be actually run in the cloud, so you can buy them more as a subscription service. So now you can go and use our vRealize suite for cloud management without having to deploy it on premises. You can buy it all as SaaS. And so I think that's important. And you're going to see that more and more. You saw that in our Q3 results that just came out. Our subscription services revenue is rising quite dramatically. And so, as a general trend, and my excitement in that space is, I'm seeing more and more people using SaaS to manage their cloud environments, and where we're taking and building. And it's important also to note that with that, we didn't take the stuff that we run on premises and just host it somewhere and let people use it. We rewrote the whole thing from scratch to be a SaaS service providing equivalent services and then more on top. And so, that's really exciting for me, I think, is seeing more and more of our customers embrace SaaS as a consumption model for their infrastructure management, as well as just, all the other stuff they do too. And you're going to see more and more of that. And we're also looking at new licensing models where we're enabling people to have sort of, mobile licenses that can flex between on-premises and the cloud and other bits and pieces as well. So there's a whole host of things as we sort of take that next step as an industry towards consuming things differently.
Excellent. There's a lot to look forward to. Lastly, Joe, what are you hoping to get out of the discussion on the 9th of December at Cloud Expo Europe, and why should people attend?
I think it's always interesting, and there's a good diverse set of people on the call actually as well, to hear a range of views from people about what's actually going on in the world as opposed to some of the hype. I think that's what I always like about these panels is we tend to cut through some of the marketing that you sometimes read in the shiny presentations, and you get to hear the raw truth about what customers are actually doing and what the reality is. And I've always been a bit of a pragmatist in that, or pragmatist, should I say, in that kind of regard. Let's cut through the hype and actually get to some of the truth. And I say that's one of the reasons I love Cloud Expo Europe, is that's where I usually get a chance to hang out and chat with some of the people that I know and get through some of the hype. And so it's pretty good to see that too.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for taking the time this afternoon to talk to us, Joe. That was Joe Baguley, CTO, VP of EMEA at VMware. If you want to catch the panel which is joining on the 9th of December, please head over to cloudexpoeurope.com and to register there.